I'm Bill Etheridge, and welcome to Open Dialogus. Tonight we're going to be discussing the Common Communications Decency Act 1996, Section 230, something that's in American law and you probably won't have heard of. I certainly hadn't until recently, but it's extremely important and extremely relevant to what's happening right now in the USA. And here to chat with me about it is Daniel Emerson, who's got a lot more information on the subject to regale us with.
Good evening. Hello, Bill. So on Tuesday, US Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany announced that President Trump was to veto the NDAA bill, which is basically it's the 1.45 trillion US funding budget that needs to be signed by the President of the United States by the 11th of December. We're just going to show a quick video explaining it.
White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany called repealing Section 230 a very important issue. She said the president is serious about tackling it and he would veto the defense bill.
White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany says President Trump is serious about vetoing the National Defense Authorization Act. It's to repeal Section 230 protections for social media giants. President Trump on Tuesday wrote, "If the very dangerous and unfair Section 230 is not completely terminated as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, I will be forced to unequivocally veto the bill." A veto would block the $1.4 trillion omnibus spending bill, and if it's not signed by December 11th, a stopgap measure is likely. One other possibility is a government shutdown. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act applies to platforms such as Facebook and Twitter.
Look exactly what that is. It's essentially a shield that is given to social media networks because they claim to be the public square. But in the case of Twitter, Twitter has become a publisher, choosing to fact check certain content. And when you're a publisher, there are certain responsibilities with that.
While Twitter flags or blocks some content, other false and dangerous posts are not blocked or flagged. McEnany listed examples of content that Twitter did not fact-check or censor, such as Chinese Communist Party officials spreading misinformation about the origins of the coronavirus, or the leader of Iran calling for genocide against all Israelis.
So the president will be unashamed in fighting against that kind of vitriol that we see and very hateful language that Twitter is publishing.
McEnany said there is bipartisan agreement that something needs to be done. The NDAA is approved by Congress every year to fund the Department of Defense and the national security programs of the Department of Energy. McEnany noted that the president will always defend the military and ensure they get adequate defense funding.
So, Kayleigh McEnany and the president taking this extremely seriously there. And as we can see from the clip, it's basically about the difference between being a publisher and being a platform. And the way that there's been so many changes in the way that Twitter and Facebook work recently, that they seem to be blurring the line. Daniel, you got any further sort of informational thoughts on this for us?
So the first question that has come to mind from what I've seen of a lot of James Delingpole, Toby Young, is why hasn't the president done this sooner? I think the argument in the president's favour is the fact that he's had hoax after hoax after hoax. He's been called every name under the sun. But the interesting thing about this now is that, as we all know, anybody that's a free thinker can see that Twitter and Facebook have not set themselves. I mean, they are clearly politically biased, and the interesting thing for me now, that even if Biden does walk into the White House, Donald Trump is still the president until January the 20th, and he can veto this bill. And the significance and the impact of this on all the businesses that are affected by this, the president not signing this bill is phenomenal. Is absolutely phenomenal. I think you made a comment to me earlier, Bill, about perhaps it does look a bit like sour grapes from the outgoing president, but can you blame him? Can you blame him? I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of sanitization of thought that is, that doesn't follow the left-wing ideology. It is, for me, it's very, very worrying. Very worrying.
Well, I certainly don't blame him. I mean, certainly for my own sort of small part that I've played in politics in the past, there are certain media outlets that I would have liked to have had a lash at on the way out. But I think the problem here for President Trump, and I'm sure many people watching this, like you and I, are broadly on his side, but he has left it to the almost, well, the dying embers, unfortunately, it would appear, of his presidency to do this. It would have been far more beneficial, I think, to the American nation as a whole, and certainly to his presidency, if he'd looked at it maybe mid-term. I think that might have been a more appropriate time to take this fight on.
Well, I disagree with you there. I think he should have done this before his inauguration. The problem is now is if we move away from the president's reaction and we shift to the fact that I think Zuckerberg and Dorsey have forced his hand. I think they've forced him to do it. All we're seeing over social media is fact checking of the president, all of his supporters, the press secretary, Rudy Giuliani. Fact check. They don't fact check when a Chinese official from the Communist Party, when he says that they believe that the virus itself came from the USA. Where was the fact check on that? Well, I think they forced it. I think they forced his hand. Now, the interesting thing about this is it has bipartisan support. The Democrats are not that they're not clever, but they're not that stupid to realise that today's friends in the political world can be your enemies tomorrow. So there's a lot of support for the repealing of Section 230. And if I was Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg, yes, they're billionaires. Yes, they're powerful, but they have made a lot of very, very powerful enemies with their clear bias. I mean, they've got some serious questions to answer.
Well, I think you touch on an important point because, politicians, by and large, despite appearances in many cases, aren't stupid. And they can see pretty clearly that when you've got a platform that is taking on this kind of editorial responsibility that is not being even-handed. I mean, the spectacle of seeing the leader of the free world's tweets fact-checked and basically rubbished by the platform it's on has been one of the things that has astonished me over the course of this last few months. It seems inconceivable that a man in that position could be victim to this kind of behaviour. And the Democrats and all of those on every side of the aisle, and even when you cross to the rest of the free world, we need to realise that once you unleash this monster, it could come for you. So it does make sense to be bipartisan on this. And it does make sense to put the sort of demon back in its box. And if these people are going to claim to be a platform, then, and with all of the legal protection that gives, they should be enforced to behave as a platform and not as a publisher, and cut the editing out. So it's a really valuable point that you made there. And I think it's something that doesn't just affect politicians in the United States. It's something that affects all of us, because let's face it, most political discussion nowadays, open and honest discussion, does go on social media. You don't tend to see it in the mainstream media that much, because you get a panel of 5 people who all agree with the same thing as as a general rule. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. And I think, do you think that the amount of cross-party support is going to be enough for President Trump to lance this ball before he has to, unfortunately, has to move himself out of the White House?
No, not now, because it serves the Democratic Party's purpose. So they'll make noise, but unfortunately, Congress is slower at working than the Houses of Parliament and our House of Lords. But I do think it's very telling that you have every mainstream media outlet all that they cut. I'm not saying it's a massive conspiracy, but nobody's interested in any of these court cases, that are querying the US election. I mean, just in the sense of I mean, now we're hearing in Georgia about ballot boxes being dragged out from underneath a table after all of the people have been kicked out because of some alleged water pipe burst. And then for 4 hours and 34 minutes, all of I mean, it's just the whole thing stinks. The whole thing stinks. And you look at Zuckerberg. I mean, there are rumours, and I'm going to say they're rumours, that he's paid a lot of money to sponsor some of these vote counters. I mean, how is that? Is that normal? That just seems to me to be. I don't know. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not comfortable with it. I think the whole thing really does look shifty. But if I my hope is that, as always, when things happen and change in America, they tend to filter down to us. Yeah. And, you know, how many, I can't even think of the amount of people that have been removed from both Twitter and Facebook at exactly the same time, you know, jointly within seconds of each other. They're supposed to be, or at least that's how I looked at it, they're supposed to be competing social media platforms, and yet they seem to be in bed with each other. I think they've bitten off more than they can chew now, because President Trump will always be president. He may not be the man in the White House, but he will now always ever be known as the president. And he's a billionaire. And dare I say it, he's a pissed off billionaire. And he has a right to be. The way he's been treated by the Democrat Party, the way he's been treated by these social media platforms. If I was Zuckerberg and if I was Dorsey, I don't get it. They're asking to be broken up.
Well, it is interesting that they do open themselves up to a case to answer. You know, you talk about the number of people who are removed from these platforms. Isn't it such a coincidence that they all seem to have very similar views? If you speak against the theory of man-made climate change, if you're very pro-Brexit, if you have views on immigration, you know, you tend to be culled or mysteriously shadow banned and things like that. And everyone watching this has either experienced it or witnessed it. And when Facebook employs someone like Nick Clegg, you start to wonder exactly how they can possibly claim not to be politically biased. So it does make for a fascinating potential case against them. Obviously, we are stressing that all of this is allegations and allegedly, but you know, they're pretty strong circumstantial evidence should it come to, you know, a legal case.
The court cases now are televised, so I think we are moving from the substantial. The accusation. I think we're now going into, you know, we're in a courtroom now. So you know, the USA, as all free courts should do, take perjury seriously. So if a lot of these Republican counters and that are lying, which they're just not. They're just not. Why is it the 6 key states all stopped counting at 9:30 on the same night at the same minute? Trump is in one state. Trump is 17% clear with 86% of the count done. When he woke up the next morning, he'd lost it by 7%. It was just, you know, I'm not saying it's impossible, but when you have the amount of court cases now that are across 11 different states, they can't all be fictitious. They can't all be fake.
No, and I think it's important, regardless of what the outcome of the querying of this postal vote situation is, it's really important that it's dug into and there is a debate and a conversation about the future of postal voting, because even, again, you take it from the biggest possible scale of the US presidential election, you can take it down to UK local council elections, you can take it down to virtually any election you're involved in. The fact is, there's always a remarkable surge for the one side of postal votes. And it's something that we've spoken about briefly before, but it's either that those broadly on the left are very good at canvassing postal voters, so, you know, sort of 90% better at it than the rest of us, or there's something unusual about it. And it happens every single time. Yeah. And, you know, my hope for this, I think, you know, hope and pray that President Trump pulls something round on it. But even if he doesn't, I hope that something is exposed that will actually change the practices in future. But the question I've got for you is, do you think even if they do expose it, not just social media, but mainstream media will be allowed to actually publicise it? Because we don't hear, certainly in the mainstream media, many of these points, and certainly the issue we're talking about tonight, about Section 230, where is that in the mainstream media?
Look, President Trump must have his head in his hands, because he knows if he wins, he knows if he wins, it will be hoax this and fake that, and he's had 4 years of it. But the one good thing is he's got the personality to it just bounces off him. He seems to thrive on it. But the significance of what happened, or what was announced on Tuesday, is that and you mentioned it earlier, Facebook and Twitter basically dominate social media across the Western world. And a lot of us, and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but I live on Twitter and I live on Facebook. I've now joined MeWe, I've joined Parler, and a lot of my friends are switching too. But it's a shame. It's a shame that they're both being used now, Twitter and Facebook, as for political gain, and it is, and it's a shame to watch it. But I think this removal of or repeal of Section 230 will be a game changer.
I think from my perspective, the only good thing about Twitter is that it is somewhere where if you want to get something out, there's a lot of journalists on it. It works a lot better in the modern sphere than a press release. And I've found that many a time, because and I don't blame them. Mainstream newspapers, the traditional press, have cut back so much on reporters that it's a lot easier to have one guy sat there watching Twitter streams and picking up stories from it, and that happens across the board in a lot of places. But I still have to question what is going on, because we've spoken about the social media platforms, and of course there's allegations and certainly potential that there's something not quite right there. But the mainstream media, as we've discussed earlier, and as I said earlier, this issue we're discussing today, it's nowhere to be seen. It could shut down the US government. That's how serious this is. And I don't President Trump is not a guy who sort of backs down easily. Although, one of the things you said about him having the right personality to take the abuse, one thing I would say is that even if you look like you're not feeling the abuse and you're feeling the issues as someone in politics, you are. And I can tell you that from my own personal experience. But certainly, I just wonder, that there's such a blackout on this particular subject, and on the allegations and some facts and evidence of the vote rigging potentially, and they're all doing it. They're all doing it in a concerted effort. It's odd.
I've been to this morning. I looked at a few of the fact-checking companies, okay, and I actually looked at some of the explanations that they gave out. If you go on social media, you can find them now, and it really comes down to opinion. So let me give you an example. So Open Dialogists received a warning when we published an article of Tucker Carlson interviewing Dr. Li Meng Yang. Apologies if I've not said her name correctly. She's a virologist that was based out of Hong Kong, and she's now in hiding because the Chinese government are after her. So do you know who I mean? Have you seen the interviews and stuff with her? She was on a lot of Good Morning Britain, and she's vanished. Social media wiped her out.
Yeah.
So I looked at the fact checkers, what they said about it. Now that she's a virologist, and an immunologist. So if she doesn't know what she's talking about, then how can a fact checker? So I looked at it, and a lot of it is opinion. Had she said 2 and 2 equals 5, we know we could fact check that, and 2 and 2 is actually 4. Yeah. But when you look at the fact checking explanations, they give you their opinion. They believe that it stemmed from bats to humans. Now, there's no evidence of that. It's their opinion, and they're entitled to their opinion. But why? How do they get the power to mark against somebody else's opinion the fact that their opinion is more valid? That's the problem with it. I haven't seen any fact-checking explanations. It always looks like it's an opinion against another opinion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that I think is the thrust of Kayleigh McEnany and President Trump's argument. I think what they're saying is that these platforms are editorializing, which if they are doing, they're entitled to do, but it takes them outside of the protection offered to them as a platform in the legislation that we're discussing tonight. And it really is important because they're getting their cake and eat it at the moment. You know, they are acting as an editorialized media publisher when still getting all the defense as if they were just a platform and hey, it's not our fault, guys. You know, so there's a strong case developing even during the course of this conversation. You can see the case developing in front of us.
I'm looking forward to it both with excitement and trepidation. Trepidation in the sense that Zuckerberg and Dorsey are very powerful men now. You know, they've got billions and billions and billions behind them, and you know they just seem to have an answer for everything. But I mean, they've basically stolen the election away from Donald Trump. That's how I look at it. With suppression, I mean, no wonder they're friends of China. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So that's why I wanted tonight you and me to chat about it, because I think the Zuckerberg and Dorsey, I think they're in a position now where they can't go back. They can't undo what they've done.
And there's another degree of importance to this as well, which is something we hadn't touched on yet. But the reality is, in these COVID lockdown, COVID rules days that we live in, the only source of legitimate protest and argument and debate against what's going on, if you can't gather for a public meeting, you can't go out on the streets to protest. And if you do, we know what happens. The only thing left is social media. And if they manage to tie that one up to the point where they can get away with editorializing and going even further than they currently are, there is literally no way left to express a different opinion or to protest. And at that point, we have reached totalitarianism. And we are standing on the edge of a precipice. So whilst this may be one of President Trump's last battles in office, it's certainly one of the most important for the future.
Absolutely, one of the problems I think for the president, if he he's not able to get a second term, is that even if he ran in 2024, he'd have all the same problems. All the same. I mean, I say that, but it may even be even worse unless this Section 230 is removed and the Facebook and Twitter are basically regulated to be a lot fairer, he would have no chance in 2024. Because here's another thing. What do you think will happen to the president's Twitter and Facebook accounts on the 21st of January? He'll wake up and he won't be on social media anymore. We all know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
They'll do it. They will do it. He'll be gone. And that's why I think he's now gone. He's been pushed over the line. I think Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg have gone too far.
Yeah, I think the main point as well that they've learned from is, if you remember when Obama won his first election, there was a lot of talk that the genius of his social media campaigning. And I think the left have seen that, and they've seen also how effectively President Trump bypassed the mainstream media with the fake news agenda, etc., etc. And they've seen that social media is actually, in the 21st century, it is an incredibly powerful tool for campaigning, which is coming to the point where it bypasses virtually all of the traditional methods because it's cheap, if not free, and you can have a massive reach. And if you know how to work it correctly, you will get to the people you need to get to. And this is why there's been so many changes, I believe, in the way that social media is run, because they don't want the wrong side, in their opinion, to reap the benefits of this platform. They'd be perfectly happy for Biden and co to do their thing. And it would be interesting if Biden does finally ascend to the presidency, how many of his tweets are fact checked.
Well, he's on the right side of the social media political sphere, isn't he? So I mean, he should be fact checked. I mean, look at some of the stuff he said. You know, you ain't black if you don't vote for me. I mean, you know, just really.
I couldn't believe it when he said that. I actually thought that he was going to get some serious backlash on that one. Can you imagine that? I mean, if that in a town hall meeting of thousands of people and actually saying that there, you know, the repercussions would have been quite tasty, I think. You know, but when you said just now he's on the side of the social media people, I think it's possibly even worse than that. I think he is the puppet of global corporations. Because anyone who's seen this guy in action knows that he's not.
Well,
Yeah, he's not. I mean, and I say this with a degree of humanity. That I look at this man and he genuinely does seem to be unwell. And he's being pushed forward as the sort of, oh, he's okay, harmless old granddad Biden.
This is all about putting Kamala in there. That's all this is.
Yeah.
But her politics they couldn't sell her politics, because who talks about the number two? Nobody.
Exactly. And they wanted someone who they could put forward as being a safe pair of hands. This man, you know, he's not radical in any one direction. He's very centrist. He's been there before. It's a nice change for some people from having this radical leader in Trump.
He's had 47 years of doing nothing, so he's safe.
Yeah, and you know, hey, look, it worked for Theresa May. So you know, there's a lot of people who achieve high office by simply not doing much, but not doing anything wrong, and you know that's where he's. But he's clearly a puppet, and whether he be the puppet of his vice president or whether he be the puppet of people further up, you know that's an element for discussion another day. But the man is not his own man. That's clear.
He can't seem to string a. I would imagine it is tiring. Of course it is. You know, it's 24/7.
Yeah.
But if he's tired campaigning, if you can call it campaigning from a basement, what's it going to be like at 2:30 in the morning when Kim Jong-il realizes that Donald Trump is no longer in the White House and that a pussycat is now in the White House? What are the Iranians going to think when they know that the president of the United States in Biden needs to sleep for 18 hours a day? You know what I mean? So it's unfair, but yeah, it is. I just hope that Donald Trump, you know, these court cases will do what the court cases did for Bush against Gore.
Yeah, and I think, you know, many of us are hoping and praying with that. I think the evidence is starting to mount up. There, you know, we had conversations recently where I said it's no good being like this without putting forward some evidence and facts, and it's starting to appear like his case is taking shape on the election alleged fraud and certainly on the social media platforms. So there is room for hope and optimism. But I think the president, no matter how powerful he is, he needs people to know what's going on. And he needs an understanding, not just in the United States, but in places like the United Kingdom, of what's happening. Because it doesn't matter who you are, you can't fight these battles alone. You need people on your side, backing you up, even if it seems that you're at the very lowest level. It's amazing the difference it makes when you've got people backing you up.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, let's hope that Section 230 is repealed, and we'll know, I think, by maybe the 9th or the 10th, because the budget needs to be signed on the 11th.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, I think we're coming to our time to wrap up. I want to say thank you, Daniel, for giving us the info. I know you're normally the wizard who does things behind the scenes rather than in front, so it's good of you to do it. And to everyone, this has been Open Dialogus. We have regular video programs like this. Please do tune in, and importantly, if you like what you hear, retweet it, share it, let people know. We need people to know what's going on and people to be there on side to help fight the good fight.
And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks, Bill.
Cheers.